Hello, you are listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your host, Tammy Ferreira.
Hi, this is Tammy, and today I'm talking about anxiety and stress in child custody. Let me ask you this question. Do you get a sick feeling in the pit of your stomach every single time you receive a communication from your co-parent? I know that used to happen for me a lot. Or maybe you've been lucky enough to have the experience of having a process server come to your home or find you at work and serve you with court papers for a motion on child custody. Also, very, very stressful. Also brings up that feeling in your gut, in the pit of your stomach, right? Where you just feel sick. And, this can make it really hard to function, right? This causes so much anxiety and stress that a lot of times it's hard to work. It's hard to parent. It's hard to even put one foot in front of the other. And so we don't have some magic wand to just drive away the anxiety, but how can we keep that from intruding on our daily life? Well, one of the things that helps a lot is if you can step back and really see this for what it is. Because so many times we catastrophize, right? We think, oh, we have this motion in front of the court. We're going to go in. What if this bad thing happens? What if that bad thing happens? We what if all over the place. And so really, can we reframe that and say, what if something good comes out of this? What if this ends up making things better? I've had two different clients whose exes filed custody motions to try to get more parenting time. Now, both of these situations are very high conflict in different ways. And so, and both of these are moms that I am working with. And both of them have dads that filed custody motions. And so, and this can go either direction, mom or dad, whichever. But in these two particular circumstances, this is what was happening. And so it's really hard because, in both of them, the dad was essentially trying to take full custody. That's what they filed for. And in both of these situations, the parents essentially have 50-50. And so both of the moms became very stressed out at the thought of not having their kids most of the time, as I think any parent would feel, right, if they were in that situation. And so what happened in both of these is they went to some form of a child custody eval. Now, neither one of them were quite full blown. And I talked about custody evals a couple episodes ago. So if you don't know what that is, or you kind of want to learn more about what that looks like, you can go back and listen to that episode. But a custody eval is essentially where you have an expert that's either a therapist or a psychiatrist, a psychologist or a psychiatrist that does a more in-depth investigation into the family dynamics to try to determine what parenting schedule is appropriate. And sometimes legal decision-making also comes into play. But in both of these circumstances, they kind of had mini versions of this where they had an expert that dug in to try to figure out what was, really going on in the situation. And in both of them, the schedules, well, and I shouldn't say in both of them. In one of them, the 50-50 was left intact. And in the other one, dad actually lost parenting time. So dad is the more difficult one in this situation. He believes mom is the problem. And so he filed to try to get more parenting time and to take the kids from mom, and it backfired. And I find that does happen a lot if you have a parent that is clueless to the system and clueless as to what the court wants. And then they go off half-cocked, filing motions and doing all these things and just trying to cause stress. A lot of times that will eventually backfire on them. And so we have to kind of trust the system a little bit and let it do its job. I do find that over time, the system will usually, the courts will figure out what's going on. A lot of times they struggle in the beginning to really figure out the dynamic, and they'll kind of give both people the benefit of the doubt in the beginning when they're trying to figure out what's really going on. But if you have a parent that's continually filing, continually causing problems, and continually not cooperating with the other parent, eventually that is going to start to come through to the court. Now, in the meantime, is it causing you anxiety and stress? It is. But if we can reframe that to, look, if this person keeps doing this, the court's eventually going to figure out what's happening. If this person keeps behaving in all of these ways, the experts and the other people involved are going to see it. And so instead of saying, well, what if this bad thing happens? What if I lose my kids? What if I've only got every other weekend? What if you ended up with more time? What if the other parent loses and this causes them to stop being difficult and not to file anything for the next 7 years in your case? If you knew that was going to be the outcome, would it be worth it? And I think for a lot of people it would. But our brain automatically goes to that worst place of what the outcome is possibly going to be. The other thing that causes us a lot of anxiety and stress is just fear of the unknown, right? A lot of times we don't know what to expect in these situations. We don't know what this is going to look like. We don't know how the court looks at these things. And that can be really scary. I know when I went through my own divorce about 17 years ago now, I had never been in court for even a traffic ticket. And so for me, I had no clue what to expect at that point. I didn't know what the process was. I didn't know how to write a declaration. I didn't know how to stand up in front of the court and talk. I didn't know any of those things. And I had a lot of fear. And like a lot of you, I had a very, charismatic ex who seemed to be able to just talk his way through life and through almost any given situation. And so I had a lot of fear around those types of things. But if you can start to get educated on the court system and how they come at child custody and what the possible outcomes are, you can start to alleviate a lot of that fear. And honestly, that fear, that stress, anxiety, a lot of times will drive people to behave in ways that actually hurt their case. And so it's real important that we recognize that we are having these feelings and that we do take steps to try to minimize those feelings as much as possible. So if you want to get educated, a lot of the things that you can do is, sometimes there are classes at your local county court. I know in California they have a lot of those. A lot of times they have online classes that you can take to understand how things are handled in the court system. And even if you don't find something that gives you a lot of education around custody specifically, which you're listening to this podcast, so that will help you with that part. But even just procedurally understanding what's happening. And many times I have clients that have attorneys and they still don't really understand what's happening. So they're still having that level of anxiety and stress that's causing them to maybe not behave or handle situations as well as they could. And then that works against them in court and hurts their credibility. So you may say, well, Tammy, I have an attorney, so I don't need to get educated on the system. And I would tell you, not true. You still need to understand, because an attorney's agenda is to push your case through the system. The attorney's agenda is not really to look at what's the best outcome for your family. And I'm not saying they don't care about that. They do, but they don't know your family. They don't have your value system. And so the outcomes that you want may not be necessarily what they think is the best outcome for your case from a legal perspective. So it's real important that you understand how these things move through the system and what the potential outcomes are so that you can make the best choice for your family. Maybe spending a ton of money on attorney's fees isn't the best choice for your family. Maybe engaging in this battle with your ex and having conflict and the children being in the middle of it and being aware of it isn't the best outcome for your family. And so the more educated you are, the less you're going to have stress about it, the less you're going to have anxiety, and the better decisions that you're going to be able to make as you're moving through this process. So I would encourage you to, I work with a lot of people as a coach, and that's a lot of what I do is just helping people understand what is even happening. Many of my clients have attorneys, but they still don't feel like they get responses. They don't get answers. They don't understand. They're still in the dark about what's going on. And so again, you can't make the best decision for your family and for your children if you're sitting in the dark. And so you've got to take proactive steps yourself to help you understand all the different aspects of this, which is more than just the legal piece of it. We tend to dump things in our attorney's lap, but the legal aspect of your case is only one aspect. You've got your own emotional part of the case. You've got your kids. You've got the day-to-day interaction with your spouse. All of those things that really aren't so much part of the legal part, but are going to have impact on you and your family for years to come. And so you want to handle that as well as possible. And you can't do that if you don't understand what's happening. The other thing that happens, I find, especially if you're dealing with somebody who is high conflict, and we talked about I touched on this just a little bit in the last episode, but a lot of times the other person will say, oh, the judge is going to do this, or, well, the court is going to do that. And they start to do the same thing they've done their whole life. And that is use their charisma, use their smooth talking to try to make you believe that you're going to lose when you go into court, right? Or that you're doing all these wrong things and that you've made the judge angry and just wait until you're in front of the judge on this issue. And I will give you a perfect example of this. I remember having a conversation with my ex-husband, and actually Thomas and I were already living together at this time. But it was very early on, and Thomas was actually in the bedroom when this conversation took place. And I remember after the conversation, he said to me, you've always said that your ex is really difficult, and I just never really I thought you were exaggerating. I just thought it was, you were being like extreme. And he's like, but I understand what you're talking about now. And I had sat down with my ex-husband, and we were trying to figure out support. And when we first separated, he was paying me support. And he missed a couple months, and I was kind of starting to struggle. And so I said, hey, let's see if we can reach negotiation on this issue. And so I remember sitting down and saying to him, and I had a job and I worked outside the home, but I'm the one that stayed in the family home with the kids. And, so the area we lived in at the time was a little expensive, and it was a struggle for sure. I did not make enough money on my own to pay for everything. So we had agreed that we wanted to try to keep the kids in the same school district. So I said, I need $2,400 a month from you. Like I just literally cannot feed us on any less than that. And that was essentially the amount of my rent at the time. And so it was kind of like, look, if you can cover the rent, I can cover everything else and all the expenses for me and the kids. And I said, that doesn't include anything like the car breaks down or somebody gets, sick or there's some emergency or whatever. That doesn't cover any of that. That's just basically me surviving on a day-to-day basis right now in this moment. $2,400 a month is what I need. And I was the person that managed the finances in the family. And so I knew full well exactly how much I needed, to be able to make everything work. He really had less idea than me probably. And so that's why I put my number out on the table, because I knew he probably didn't even have a ballpark of what it needed to be. And by my calculations, this still left him more money to live on a month by himself than it did with me and the two boys together. And so he came back and said, nope, I can only do $2,000 a month. And I said, but I can't make it on that. And he's like, you're just being ridiculous. You're a gold digger. I can't do any more than $2,000 a month. And you're going to see the judge is going to blah, 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 blah. You're never going to get that much. And started feeding me all of this stuff about how it wasn't, realistic what I was asking for. And so what does that do? Okay. Am I being greedy? Makes you start doubting yourself. Am I asking for too much? I felt stressed. I felt, fearful. Oh my goodness. I don't think I can make it any less than that. What am I going to do? How could I make 2,000 work and all of these things? And so finally I just, ended up filing a motion with the court on support because we just couldn't reach agreement. And that was very fearful for me because I didn't know at the time what the outcome was going to be. I didn't know that there was such a thing as a child support calculator that I could plug numbers into and figure out what that outcome was going to be. And so that does exist. If you don't know, you can go in and plug numbers into a child support calculator and it'll get you very close and you'll have an idea. If you're in California specifically, there you just Google California child support calculator and the state calculator will come up. If you're in a different state, obviously Google your state. There's probably a formula or a calculator or something. Most states have a guideline formula that applies for child support. Dare I say every state probably. So anyway, I filed this motion and I go in and the court ordered $2,900 a month. So $500 more a month than I was even asking for. And so really in filing that motion, I didn't need to have any fear or any worry or any concern because the chances were a given essentially that I was going to get at least what I was asking for. There was no downside. The only downside that came was in my own head because I believed what my ex was saying, even though he has no background in legal. He didn't know anything about what he was talking about either. He had no past experience with this. He hadn't been divorced before, never paid child support, none of those things. And yet I allowed him to convince me that I was being the ridiculous one and that somehow the court was going to see me as such. And so again, this goes back to my previous point as well, which is get educated so that you understand what those things are, so that you're not operating out of a place of fear, but out of a place of confidence and knowing. And, even if that number had been 2,200, right? If it'd been less than what I was asking for, it would have still been more than what he was willing to give me. And so either way, I came out better off than I would have been by just giving in. Now, that's not always the case because sometimes what you're arguing about is going to cost you a whole lot more money to go after. If we're talking about assets or we're talking about child custody issues and you have to have investigations or pay for evaluations or, sometimes there's a lot more consideration. The child support tends to be one of those things that's a pretty straightforward issue. And most states have child support services where you can contact them and they'll essentially help you with all of that. And so that was a particularly straightforward issue where I didn't really have anything to worry about. But the point of it is I didn't know. And at least once you know, then you can make reasonable, calculated decisions about how you want to handle that situation. So it's real important when you're going through this that you find support of other people. And when I say that, I don't mean your friends and family. So often I have people who come back who have listened to friends or family about their situation. And, every situation is so different. And also that person may not have handled it the way you would have handled that given situation. And so we tend to kind of let that feed our fear or feel like that might be our worst case scenario. And maybe that person's behaved in ways that you've never behaved. One example I remember is Thomas and I taught a workshop one time, and we had a lady in there who said, oh, yeah, I talked to my brother and, he said such and such thing. And I remember Thomas stopped her and said, "Oh, has your brother been through a divorce?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, 3 times." And Thomas started laughing and said, "I'm not sure that's the person that you want to take your advice from." I also have people that'll come back and say things like, "Well, I have 3 children and my neighbor has 3 children and she's getting $500 more a month in child support than I am. Why is that?" Well, it can be a number of things. Maybe her husband makes more money. Maybe you earn more money than she does if you're the support receiver. And so you're not getting as much because you have more of your own income. Maybe her ex-husband has less parenting time with the kids than yours does. Maybe health insurance costs for the families are very different. Maybe somebody's paying into a mandatory retirement in one situation and not in another. And so there's all these different factors that come into play when we're talking about the various issues. And even on child custody, sometimes parents live closer. Sometimes they live further. Sometimes the children are younger and need more frequent transitions. Sometimes they're teenagers and don't care about the parents at all. There's all these different things. And so almost always there are different things in your circumstance than there are in somebody else's. And this is why just talking to friends and family can be, very dangerous, because we're sort of comparing notes with them, but we're not usually comparing apples to apples. We're comparing apples to oranges and bananas and pineapples and everything else. And so this is why it's important to have people around you that are educated and knowledgeable about the system and about how certain things are handled, because this isn't as simple as getting advice from your 3 closest, guy or girl friends who have been through this, because it's not going to look the same for everybody. And those people can be great emotional support and they can be present for you. I have a lot of people that have been present for me since Thomas passed away. People that have come and brought food and spent time. And my children have come from out of state to stay with me for extended periods and support me. And all these people around me that I'm so grateful to have and to have their love and support. But at the end of the day, those people have not had the experience of dealing with the loss of a spouse. Most of them, some of them have, but most of them have not. They also don't have practical experience, a lot of them, on how to deal with grief, how to deal with trauma, how to process these types of emotions, and what are good things to do and what are bad things to do. And so I personally have gotten in a grief group to help me with that. I'm seeing a therapist and I have my friends and all those things. So I'm not saying your friends and family can't be valuable, but I'm saying they're one component of it, and you can't rely on them for the nuts and bolts aspect of your case and how to handle things in front of the judge, because how your friends or family would go about handling something isn't necessarily what a family law judge is going to want to see from you. And so it's real important that you make that distinction and you make sure that you're surrounding yourself with all those different components that you need to be successful in this situation. Child custody issues are tough. They're tough at the very best. And so make sure that you're surrounding yourself with good support that's going to help you do this well and the best you can for you and your kids. Thanks for joining me this week. If you are listening to me on YouTube, watching me on YouTube, I should say, you can see me, right? If you're watching me on YouTube, please click like on this video and also subscribe so that you get notified as new videos are released each week. If you're listening to the podcast, also subscribe so you get notified as new episodes are released. And please don't forget to rate and review me. I really appreciate that. Helps other people find me, helps improve my rankings, and I really appreciate your guys' support. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your host, Tammy Ferreira. For more information, visit www.divorceuniversityonline.com.